Hello everyone, Danasa here with ActionVFX. In this tutorial, we will learn how to do this Wolverine-inspired healing wound effects in Adobe After Effects. We'll be using MochaPro's Power Mesh feature to do our tracking, and After Effects' very own reshape effects to do the healing animation. For the wound itself, we will be using assets from ActionVFX Gore Texture collection with some blood from the Blood Splatter collection. This tutorial will focus on the wound on my forehead, but the effects will be applicable to any parts of the face that you want. So, without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so here is my main comp with a plate of myself doing some head movement. Now, let's begin tracking my head. As I mentioned, I will be using Power Mesh on Mocha because my head is tilting and moving around, and I want my wound to follow the curvature and screen stretches, if any, of my forehead as it moves. So, let's get MochaPro, drag it to our plate, and then we are going to click on the icon. And then After Effects will take us to the MochaPro window. First, before we track, we want to decide one reference frame for our shot. Basically, the one frame where we will see our wound the clearest, very exposed, and no motion blur. For this footage, I found that frame 115 works just for that. So then, let's grab X-Spline tool and start covering area that we want to track. This tutorial only focuses on the forehead, but I'm also tracking the cheek here just in case. So now that we have our area decided, we want to turn this into Power Mesh. So click on Perspective and Mesh, and then we will have this spider web on our track area. This web will help us track the skin deformation in our face. Now let's change the settings a little bit. So here I have found that keeping the generation mode on automatic works just fine. And I want to keep the mesh size in 32. But I want to turn on the adaptive contrast, and then we want to regenerate our mesh, and now our mesh track has becoming more detailed. And then we want to disable the adaptive contrast, and we want to begin tracking. So let's track forward and then backwards. Okay, so we have our scene track looking great. However, you can see there's a little bit of floating point at the edge of my cheek here. That is fine because we're only focusing on the forehead for this tutorial. But if you want to fix this, something that you can do is to manually move the points to the correct place. So you can go to Edit the Track Mesh, click it, and then you can just manually move the points, and it will create a keyframe. But we are going to leave this for now because we are focusing on the forehead. So before we go, we want to make sure that Mocha has our reference frame set at frame 115. So let's go to Stabilize here, and let's go to frame 115. And then we are going to click plus on this frame list. Great, so now we have assigned frame 115 as the reference frame. So let's check by clicking on this warp mapping, mesh warp. And here we can see some weird looking distortion. That is because our track area has been stabilized to stay input based on our reference frame. This will be extremely helpful on compositing our wound. So what we will do later is we want to stabilize our plate like this, so we can add our wound without worrying that it will move around. And then we would revert everything back to normal. So once again, make sure that the frame list is listed on 115. If it's not there, click it again. And we want to exit and save. Now we are back in After Effects, and we have our plate here, and of course our Mocha that has our tracking data embedded on it. Next, what we want to do is to create a separate composition workspace for our wound. So let's duplicate our plate, and on the top one, let's stabilize it like before. So go to Modules, hit Render, and change the module here to Stabilize Unwarp. And there we go, we are back to the stabilize like we have seen earlier. Now let's pre-compose this. Ctrl-Shift-C, and then want to move all attributes to a new composition, and let's rename this Face Track. Okay, so let's go inside. Now we have a dedicated pre-composition to do our wound. Since this plate will only work as our reference for compositing, let's change it to a guide layer by right-click and guide layer. So now this blade will appear on here on this composition to guide us, but if we go outside, it will not be rendered. So let's go back here. Next, we are finally going to add our wound. So I will use this cut number 2 top from our Gore Texture collection. I am using the EXR file version instead of the PNG because it will be important later. Now let's position our wound to our forehead. Okay, so this is good enough. So let's see what we have here. Cool. Then we are going to use mesh warp so I can bend this cut wound to wrap around the curvature of my head. So let's go back to our reference frame, which is frame 115. And actually let's add marker to frame 115 so we know where it is. There we go. Then let's get mesh warp. And then let's set the rows and columns as 4. And then we want to start wrapping it around my head. Okay, now let's go back to our main comp and see what we have. Let's scrub through the timeline here. And it is not tracked. That's because we still have the composition of our wound based on the stabilized plate. So we want to reverse this stabilization like I said before. So let's copy Mocha from the other plate and paste it to our face track composition. And then on the module renders, we're going to click render again. But this time, we're going to click on stabilize warp and then the wound with unstabilized. And now it's following the head. Great. Next, we're going to start blending this wound a little bit more. So let's go back inside to our face track. And here you can see in our Gore texture, we have the inner wound and the outside skin. There are many ways to composite our wound here. One thing you can do is to color correct the outside skin here to match the skin on the real plate. However, for this shot, I found just removing the skin entirely also works just fine. Basically, it depends on how you want your gore wound to look on your skin. If you want to keep the outside skin, we have made a color correction tutorial just for that you can check out in the description. So if you are using the PNG version of this file, what you can do of course is to just remove the skin by masking it out. Or if you are using the EXR file version, like what I'm using here, we can just grab a mask layer that is embedded on this file. So first we want to pre-compose our wound. So let's click Ctrl+Shift+C and we're going to leave all attributes and name it wound mask. Now we have pre-comped our wound by itself. So let's go inside here and we're going to duplicate the layer. And then on the top one, we are going to get extractor effects. Drag it to the top. So now we have access to all the EXR layers of this file. And we are going to click on skin mask. And now we have this black and white matte representing the inner wound, which is on black, and the outside skin, which is the white. So let's select our bottom layer and we are going to change the track matte into Luma inverted towards the mask. So now we have our inner wound isolated. Of course, we have a little bit of this extra pixels on the outside. So let's grab our pen tool and start masking. There we go. Press F and let's feather it. And now we have our inner wound isolated. So now let's go outside the comp and boom, we have our wound already looking really good. Now let's color correct it a little bit. The wound is actually already blending quite well in the scene, but let's push it a bit more. I want to make our gore wound to be a bit less blue. So let's get curve effect on our wound and let's go to blue and just reduce it a little bit. And then here we see based on the lighting on my head, our wound on this side should be a bit brighter because of the lighting and the wound on this side should be a bit darker. So let's fix that. Let's make this part darker and this part a bit brighter. So we are going to get another curve. This time we are going to name it, say, dark curve. And then we're going to pull the highlights down. There we go. However, we only want to affect this area. So to do that, we are going to grab pen tool and create a mask on that area. So we're gonna open this up and look for our mask. Press enter. Let's rename it dark mask. Okay. And then we are going to press E and it will bring our dark curves here. And we're gonna go to the compositing options and hit plus. And now if we disable the mask here, we can see that the dark curve only affects that area. Press MM and we're going to feather it a bit. Okay, so if we disable the dark curve here, we can see what's going on. Then we will do another one for the bright part. So let's get another curves, bring it to our wound mask, and let's brighten up our wound. And then let's rename this, and then create another mask. Let's rename it. And then we're going to press E again, and on the bright curves, in the compositing option ++, and select the bright mask. And press F again, and feather it. There we go. So now, if we disable the dark curve and the bright curves, we see the difference. Great! Now let's add our blood. I'm going to use this blood splatter texture from our blood splatter collection. Press S. Let's scale it down. Let's go here, and I want this smaller blood splat on my forehead. There we go. And then let's duplicate our blood, just so we can have more variation on our blood. Okay, so this is looking really cool. Now I want to pre-compose both of our blood splat. And then let's draw our mask so it only encompasses our forehead. Okay, cool. Now we are going to make the blood splat to wrap around my head. So let's get another mesh warp and let's warp this. Okay, cool. And then what we want is we want to subtract around the part where we have the wound because we don't want the blood to be touching the wound. So let's grab the pen tool again and draw a shape here, and then press M and subtract. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's get curves to color correct our blood a little bit. Okay, alright. Now I want to scale up the wound just a little bit and adjust the blood mask. And cool, so this is what we have. However, we can still see here we have our wound on top of this hair string and also on top of this clump of hair. So let's fix that. So we can fix this hair by using a simple luminance key, because my hair is way darker than my skin, except for the string of hair, which is a bit too thin to do a simple key. So we are going to rebuild this part of the hair instead. So let's go to Layer, New, Solid, and we're going to name this Hair Thin. Okay, and then let's disable it for now. And then we're gonna draw an open mask. So let's grab this pen tool and draw a line here following the hair. And then let's turn on the layer again. And we're gonna go get stroke effects. And then we're gonna change this to transparent. And then we're going to change the color to the color of our hair. Let's zoom in here. And then let's reduce the brush size a little. So let's say 1.5. There we go. So if we disable the mask, we have rebuilt the hair. Of course, it's a bit too harsh, so maybe reduce the opacity a little bit. There we go. So now let's fix this clump of hair. So we're going to go outside to the main comp, and then we are going to duplicate our plate, put it on top, and then we are going to get extract. Push the white point here until it reaches the hair. There we go. And then let's increase the softness just a little bit. There we go. Maybe lower the white point again. There we go. Great. So the wound here should be a bit more darker. So let's go back to the face track and go to the wound mask. And let's toggle mask again. And we're actually going to darken it a little bit more on the dark curve. So now let's go back to the main comp and play to see what we have. Awesome. Looking really cool. However, the reflection inside the wound is static, which is not what we want because the head is moving. That means this reflection should be moving also. So let's move our reflection. Let's go inside to our wound mask comp. And then we are going to select the bottom layer of our cut wound and then pre-compose it. We're going to leave it to attributes and let's name it wound EXR. So let's go inside. And now what we're going to do is we're going to play around with this reflection inside the wound. Thankfully, we are using the EXR version of this asset. So we can just pull out our reflection pass. So let's get extractor. And now we have access to the layers. And the first thing we're going to do is actually select the subsurface scattering or SSS. So now we have our wound without the reflection. So let's duplicate our layer. And then we're going to change the layer here to reflection or specular lighting. There we go. And then on this specular layer, we're going to change the blending mode to additive. So now the reflection is back on the wound. And then we're going to rename the layer accordingly. So the top one, let's name it. And the bottom one. And now we have our wound back, but this time the reflection is separated from the wound. However, currently our wound is really dark. That's because the extractor effect that we have here changed our footage color space from sRGB to linear. So let's change it back. Let's get an adjustment layer. And then let's get color profile converter. And then we are going to click on linearize input profile. And now we have our wound back. Next, we are going to make the reflection looks like it's moving as my head is moving around. So to do that, let's first create a new solid. Let's name this fractal. And then let's get fractal noise. And then I'm actually going to increase the contrast just a little bit. Okay. And then let's get a fast blur and put it to like 7. And then we're going to put the fractal solid behind our specular reflection. Then we're going to change the track matte to Luma matte. And now what we're going to do is we are going to animate the fractal to make the reflection to move according to my head movement. So let's go back to our main comp, and then we are going to lock our monitor. And then let's go back to our Wound EXR pre-comp, and then we will have automatically 2 monitors in front of us. One is the locked one, which is our main comp, and the other one is the composition we are currently in, which is our Wound EXR pre-comp. So this will help us on deciding the animation of the reflection to match the head movement. So first what we're going to do is we are going to go to the reference frame, which is frame 115, and then select our fractal solid, and we're going to press P. And then put keyframe on the position, and let's go backwards. Here we see my head is tilting to the right of the screen, so let's move to the opposite direction. There we go. And then basically we're just going to keep doing this too every time I move my head. Okay, so let's select all the keyframes and then change it to Easy Ease. There we go. And actually I want to increase the contrast a little bit. And now let's close our Wound EXR monitor and disable the lock, go to the main comp, and hit play to see what we have so far. Perfect. You can see the little bit of movement when I tilt my head there. It's very subtle, but sells the effects really well. So now let's start on the healing animation. So for the healing animation effects, there are many ways to do it. We can use a simple matte, where I just mask out the wound, or we can just use opacity to make the wound fade out. But I want to do something different. Instead of just the wound disappearing, I also want it to close up over time. So first, let's decide the timing. I want the healing to start around here at frame 50 and then ends at around frame 150. So let's go to the face track pre-comp and select our wound mask composition, and then we are going to pre-compose it. Leave all attributes and name it wound animation. So now let's go inside, and here's what I want to do. I want these wound edges to close up over time. To do that, let's get an effect called reshape. So here in reshape, we have this input. We have source mask and destination mask. So first, what we're going to do is we are going to create a mask that follows the shape of our wound. So let's select this pen tool and start drawing. Okay, let's press M and change the mask from add to none. And then we are going to duplicate the mask, Ctrl D, and then let's differentiate the color for the other mask. And then we are going to change the name of the mask one to source mask. And then I'm going to lock it so we don't accidentally move it. And then rename the mask 2 to destination mask. And then let's go to the reshape effects and change the source mask to source and the destination mask to destination mask. And then change the percentage to 100. So now if we move to destination mask, we will see our wound distorted following the mask. So what's happening here is basically we are telling reshape to take the area that we have selected on the source mask and make it follow the destination mask by 100%. So now what I want to do is animate the destination mask. So let's keyframe on frame 50 here. So select the destination mask, press MM, and click keyframe on the mask path. And then let's go to say frame 150, and then we are going to close our wound. So now let's see our animation. Perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to vary the animation a little bit by adding another keyframe in the middle. So now that we have morphed the wound, let's make it disappear. So let's create a new solid. Let's name it Transition Matte. And then we are going to alpha matte our wound mask to the Transition Matte. There we go. And then we are going to create a circle around our wound. So hold here and select ellipse and create a circle here. There we go. Make sure the circle is centered to the wound. Next, let's animate the expansion. Open this up and let's go to frame 50 and then hit keyframe on the mask expansion and then go to frame 150 and then reduce the expansion until the wound disappears. There we go. So now let's feather it. So let's give it say 55. Okay, so we have this. I want the edges to be a bit more uneven. So let's get turbulent displace and add it to our transition matte. And I actually gonna go back to the feather and change it to 12. And then let's go to the turbulent displace and change the displacement to twist smoother. And then the amount to something like 300. And the size to around say 70. And then let's increase the feather again just a little bit so it's not too harsh. And now we have our wound disappearing thanks to the matte as it closes. Awesome. Before we go, let's change this keyframe at the start and the bottom and change it to Easy Ease just to smooth out the animation. And we are good to go. Now let's see how everything is looking on the main comp. Okay, so this is what we have. We are practically done, but I want to do one last thing to really push the effects. I want to add some skin deformation on my forehead as my wound heals. And we are going to use reshape again to do that. So let's go back to our face track comp and we are going to duplicate our stabilized plate here. So Ctrl D, and then on the top one, let's disable the guide layer because we will use this one. And then next, we want to create a mask around where we will see our deformation, which is my forehead. However, we cannot just use a mask on this layer because this layer currently has MochaPro to stabilize it. And MochaPro prevents this layer to get affected by mask. So what we will do is we want to pre-compose this, move all attributes and name this stabilized plate, and then mask the area that we want to deform. Let's solo this stabilized plate to see if we get what we have. There we go. Press F and let's feather it a bit and disable the solo again. Then we want to bring the blood splatter next to the stabilized plate and we want to composite them together because we want the skin deformation to also affect the blood splat. Ctrl-Shift-C and let's name this skin deformation. So next what we're going to do is we are going to add reshape effects to our skin deformation comp. So let's get reshape and add it to that comp. And then just like before, let's create a source mask. Press M, disable it, and then let's rename this. And then duplicate it, lock the source mask, and let's rename the second mask. And then change the color. Then let's assign our masks to the reshape. So change the source mask to source mask and destination mask to destination mask. And then let's make the destination mask a bit bigger. Then I'm gonna go to frame 50. Then I'm going to change the percentage to 100 for now. And then at keyframe, let's go to the frame where the wound already heals and change the percentage to 0. So what I'm trying to do is I have the skin distorted as the wound is open, and then when it closes, the skin would go back to normal. So let's change the keyframe here to easy ease so the animation is smooth. Perfect. And then next, what we're going to do is we are going to set up a boundary for the reshape, because currently the reshape is morphing a lot of stuff that we actually don't want to morph, just like the hair string here. So let's create another mask, and we want to make sure to exclude area that we don't want. Press M, change it to none. Let's rename this. And then we are going to change the boundary mask on the reshape to our boundary mask. So now the morphing will only affect the areas that we have designated here. So let's press F to bring a little feather on the boundary mask. One thing that I want to change a little bit is maybe the percentage is too much at the beginning here. So let's press U again to bring our keyframe. Go to the keyframe, and maybe instead of 100%, it's 80%. So let's go back to the main comp, and we're gonna hit play. And this is what we have. And we can see the skin deformation really added a little bit more punch to the effects. So one last thing before we wrap, we can see there is some camera blur at the beginning of the shot here. So let's get camera lens blur, put it to our face track, and then let's change the blur radius to something like 1 and add keyframe. And then as I step forward, let's change it to 0.2. And then we also want to add a little bit of motion blur, but not too much. You can use any motion blur effects that you want, but I will be using a third-party plugin called Real Smart Motion Blur. And I'm going to reduce the motion sensitivity to maybe 10. And that was the tutorial on how to do Wolverine-inspired healing effects in Adobe After Effects. If you want to purchase the assets that I used in this tutorial, you can check out our website at ActionVFX.com. At ActionVFX, we provide high-quality VFX assets for your VFX needs. We have fire, explosions, energy, and many others. You can also sign up for our ActionVFX subscription starting at the low cost of $14.99 per month. This is the most affordable way to access our library, and you can cancel anytime, no contract. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comment section below what kind of tutorials that you'd like to see next. And see you next time. Bye bye.